Do you ever wonder what happened to those bold diet secrets from the 1960s? The ones doctors don't talk about anymore? They shaped how we looked and lived. But if they vanished so quietly, what did we lose? The grapefruit and black coffee diet was one of those wild little relics from the 1960s that somehow made starving yourself sound sophisticated. Back then, this was all the rage in beauty magazines and even popped up in doctors' offices, if you can believe it. The whole idea was simple and honestly kind of brutal. You started every meal with half a grapefruit, no sugar, no honey, nothing fun. Just straight-up sour citrus that promised to melt fat away thanks to some so-called magic enzymes. Then, you washed it down with a piping hot cup of black coffee. No milk, no cream, no sugar, because apparently flavor was the enemy of a flat stomach. This combo was supposed to fire up your metabolism, torch fat, and keep you energized, all without actually filling you up. It got pushed especially hard on women trying to slim down fast for summer vacations or those never-ending dinner parties. The worst part? Some doctors really did back it, claiming grapefruit had enzymes that triggered weight loss and caffeine kept cravings in check. Of course, the science behind it was shaky at best, but that never stopped anyone. Looking back, it feels more like an endurance test than a diet plan. Still, people swore by it, even if they were secretly dreaming of a real breakfast the whole time. Metricol liquid meals were basically the 1960s version of meal replacement shakes, only way more intense and with a government-approved health stamp that made people believe they were doing something revolutionary. Picture this: a canned, milky drink that looked suspiciously like chalky soup packed with vitamins and protein and marketed as your complete meal. You drank it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner if you were really committed to losing weight or just punishing yourself. Metricol was everywhere: office fridges, suburban kitchens, even tucked into gym bags like it was some miracle elixir. The government and medical professionals at the time pushed it as a modern, scientifically sound way to slim down without actually cooking. It promised portion control without the hassle, and they made it sound like a cutting-edge breakthrough in nutritional science. Spoiler alert, it mostly tasted terrible, and by today's standards, it barely passed as food. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and people wanted quick fixes more than they wanted flavor. Some folks even turned it into a social event. Metricol parties, where everyone sipped their can and compared who lost the most pounds. It sounds funny now, but back then, this stuff ruled the diet scene. And if you had a few cans stacked neatly in your fridge, you looked like you were serious about health, even if you were starving. Cigarettes as appetite suppressants were not some underground rebellious thing in the 1960s. They were doctor-endorsed, heavily advertised, and disturbingly common as part of the whole weight loss routine. Imagine lighting up a smoke with your morning coffee, not for pleasure, but because some well-dressed doctor in a crisp white coat told you it would help curb your appetite. That was reality for millions of people trying to stay slim back then. Tobacco companies knew exactly what they were doing, running ads that casually mentioned how smoking could help keep your figure. And sadly, plenty of medical professionals backed the claim, either because they truly believed it or because the tobacco industry was lining their pockets. It was a perfect storm: social pressure to stay thin, cigarettes being everywhere, and health authorities turning a blind eye. You were practically encouraged to replace snacks with smokes, especially if you were a young woman worried about fitting into those pencil skirts and cocktail dresses. Never mind the whole cancer part. They would get to that much later. At the time, staying slim was the bigger public obsession. Looking back, it is one of the strangest, saddest diet secrets that society somehow agreed on. And yet, in that moment, people genuinely thought they were choosing health every time they lit up. The cottage cheese and canned peach lunch plan might sound innocent enough today, but back in the 1960s, it was the signature meal of every calorie-counting housewife trying to look good and keep up with the impossible beauty standards of the time. You would open a can of syrupy peaches, scoop out some cottage cheese, and maybe throw in a sad little sprig of parsley for presentation if you were feeling fancy. That was lunch. Low-calorie, high-protein, and extremely light on satisfaction. Doctors and dietitians push this combo as the ideal midday meal for women watching their waistlines, while juggling work, house chores, or PTA meetings. The logic made sense in theory. Protein from the cottage cheese to keep you full, fruit for vitamins, and minimal calories overall. But if you peel back the layers, this was basically hunger dressed up as health advice. Women were expected to smile through it, show up to parties looking flawless, and never complain about being hungry. You would see this meal plastered across magazines, recipe cards, even community cookbooks, like it was some gourmet, foolproof way to stay slim. In truth, it was a quiet, daily reminder that looking good came before feeling full. And yet, millions followed the routine because the scale mattered more than satisfaction, and appearance always came first. The drinking man's diet took everything you thought you knew about health and flipped it upside down, and people loved every second of it. Imagine being told by a book, endorsed by actual doctors, that you could skip the bread, pass on the potatoes, but still knock back martinis, steaks, and rich cheeses, all in the name of weight loss. It sounded too good to be true, and for plenty of people it absolutely was. But the 1960s had a flair for bold contradictions, and this diet fit right in. Low carb before low carb was trendy. It promised rapid slimming without giving up your evening cocktails or lavish dinners. Doctors pushed it as a scientific breakthrough for men who wanted to drop pounds without sacrificing their social life or manhood. You could drink, eat red meat, indulge in butter, all while supposedly watching the weight fall off. Bread and desserts? Off limits? But bourbon and bacon? Totally fair game. Unsurprisingly, it became a hit at dinner parties and bars, especially among businessmen who liked the idea of dieting without suffering. Science eventually caught up with this nonsense, but for a while people genuinely believed booze and steak were the secrets to staying slim. The funny part is, it worked for some, until the heartburn, fatigue, and doctor's visits caught up with them. The half-a-plate rule was one of those diet tricks that showed up in practically every women's magazine during the 1960s, always presented as a tidy scientific solution to keeping your figure under control. The idea? Simple portion control. You were supposed to serve yourself a full plate at dinner, except only half of it was meant for actual food. The other half stayed empty, staring back at you like a quiet little guilt trip. It was not about eating healthier, necessarily, just less. Less pasta, less roast beef, less potatoes, all in the name of fitting into your favorite dress. This rule was everywhere. Printed on the back of cereal boxes, taught in home economics classes, even whispered at dinner parties like it was groundbreaking advice. Mothers told their daughters, friends shared it like some magical shortcut to thinness, and for a while people bought into it without question. The worst part was, it sounded so practical that it almost made sense. No complicated recipes, no calorie charts, no fancy gadgets, just your plate playing diet cop at every meal. But nobody mentioned how frustrating it was to stare down an empty plate when your stomach was still growling, or how easy it was to half-plate your way through dinner only to end up in the pantry snacking on crackers an hour later. And if you were hosting guests? Good luck explaining why half your plate looked like it belonged in an art exhibit and the other half was embarrassingly bare. But for a decade obsessed with slim silhouettes, beauty standards, and control, the half-a-plate rule sounded like the easiest shortcut to get there. People convinced themselves it worked, even when their hunger and their cupboards told a different story. The banana and skim milk cleanse was one of those crash diets that made absolutely no sense the second you stopped to think about it. But that never stopped the 1960s from giving it a go. Picture this. Your entire diet consisted of plain bananas and skim milk. That was it. 3 bananas, 3 glasses of milk, spaced out over the whole day, and you were supposedly on your way to detoxing your body and dropping pounds fast. It was sold as a miracle cleanse, a medically sound, doctor-approved reset for your metabolism. Weight loss gurus, women's magazines, and even some well-meaning doctors promised glowing skin, more energy, and rapid fat loss, all thanks to this bizarre fruit and dairy routine. But underneath the shiny promises, it was basically controlled starvation dressed up as science. You would start your morning with a banana and a glass of watery milk, feel lightheaded by lunchtime, and somehow convince yourself that meant it was working. Dinner time rolled around and your willpower felt like it was on life support. But hey, you still had one more banana to look forward to. The cleanse was brutal, boring, and left most people daydreaming about a real meal by the end of day one. But back then, the promise of shedding weight fast, no matter the cost, was enough to keep this diet alive way longer than it should have been. Some folks even bragged about surviving multiple rounds of it, wearing their misery like a badge of honor, all in the name of slimness. No water with meals sounds like one of those strange old wives' tales. But believe it or not, actual nutritionists in the 1960s used to preach this as serious diet advice. The theory went like this. Drinking water during meals supposedly diluted your stomach acid, which they claimed slowed digestion and made it harder for your body to burn fat. You were expected to sip before or after eating, but never during. Water with dinner? Forbidden. Coffee or soda? Somehow those slipped by, which makes the whole thing sound even sillier in hindsight. But people believed it, clinging to the idea that skipping water could speed up weight loss and keep their metabolism humming along. It even made its way into mainstream diet books, afternoon talk shows, and was passed around beauty salons and bridge clubs like cutting-edge health wisdom. Moms told their daughters, dietitians reminded their clients, and suddenly the idea that hydration could ruin your meal became gospel. Of course, today we know better, hydration is not the enemy, but back then, people were desperate for any trick to stay slim, even if it meant chewing their way through a dry sandwich while their glass of water sat untouched nearby. The sight of someone dutifully refusing water during dinner became so common, nobody batted an eye. Looking back, it is one of those diet relics that makes you wonder how anyone survived the decade without constant dehydration, or at least without constantly regretting their life choices every time they tried to swallow a dry meal. Liver tablets for energy and fat burn were practically a rite of passage for anyone even half serious about losing weight or building muscle in the 1960s. You could walk into any drugstore and see the shiny little bottles lined up, tucked between the multivitamins, aspirin, and those questionable diet pills that promised you the world. These tablets were made from concentrated, desiccated beef liver. Yes, actual dried cow liver ground into pill form, and were hyped as the miracle shortcut to more energy, faster fat burning, and leaner bodies. Gym trainers, health gurus, and even some doctors championed them like they had just discovered the missing link to a perfect metabolism. You were supposed to pop a handful before workouts or with your morning coffee, and in theory, you would have the stamina of an Olympian and the metabolism of a teenage track star. The reality? Well, it was mostly just iron and protein, and they came with a strange, faint aftertaste that reminded you exactly what part of the cow these things came from. But the hype was impossible to resist. Weightlifters swore by them. Housewives stashed them in purses like they were secret weapons. Even beauty magazines recommended them as a safe alternative to cigarettes for appetite control. It sounded simple. Skip the crash diets, forget starving yourself. Just take these little pills and your body would magically cooperate. Of course, they did not live up to the miracle promises, but in a decade obsessed with shortcuts to slimness, liver tablets sold like hotcakes. If nothing else, they made you feel like you were doing something proactive, which sometimes mattered more than the actual results. Salad dressing made with saccharin was one of those strange diet trends that could only thrive in the 1960s, where science experiments disguised as food were practically part of everyday life. Saccharin was one of the earliest artificial sweeteners to hit store shelves, and for calorie-conscious folks desperate to keep their waistlines in check, it felt like a gift from the diet gods. Suddenly, you could pour tangy, creamy dressing all over your salads without worrying about sugar, fat, or those dreaded calories sabotaging your good intentions. Housewives mixed it into vinaigrettes, slathered it over iceberg lettuce, and smiled politely while convincing themselves it tasted just like the real thing. The low-calorie salad dressing craze spread like wildfire. Potlucks, cocktail parties, office lunches. Wherever someone was watching their figure, saccharin found its way to the table. Never mind the strange metallic aftertaste or the nagging rumors about health risks. People were so afraid of gaining weight that they convinced themselves this chemical shortcut was their best option. Saccharin crept into everything from soda to dessert recipes, but salad dressing was where it really took center stage for dieters. It became the secret weapon to drown your greens in flavor while keeping your conscience and the scale clear. Looking back, it feels unsettling that so many embraced a lab-created sugar substitute without question, but for the diet-obsessed culture of the 1960s, anything that made slimness feel effortless became an instant hit. The 7-day hot dog and egg diet was the kind of baffling, protein-heavy weight loss plan that somehow made perfect sense in the 1960s. A decade when nearly every fad diet sounded more like a dare than nutritional advice. This particular plan promised rapid fat loss, improved metabolism, and fewer cravings, all by loading your plate with boiled eggs and actual hot dogs. Yes, hot dogs, the same processed, salt-packed snack you would find at ball games and backyard barbecues. Breakfast started with eggs, lunch was hot dogs and more eggs, and dinner was, you guessed it, even more protein, maybe with a limp lettuce leaf or a sad tomato slice if you were feeling fancy. The science behind it was shaky, but the idea of filling up on protein to burn fat and keep hunger at bay was enough to convince desperate dieters. Magazines praised its simplicity. No calorie counting, no complicated recipes, just hot dogs, eggs, and willpower. Grocery stores saw shelves emptied of cartons and meat packages as people stocked up, determined to survive their 7 days of sodium and cholesterol. Of course, the reality hit hard. Bloating, fatigue, and a general sense of questioning your life choices. But the promise of dropping pounds fast kept people coming back. By the end of the week, you might have lost water weight, but most folks gained a new understanding of what it meant to suffer for slimness. It sounded absurd, even dangerous, but back then, it passed for common sense. Weighing yourself after every meal was one of those anxiety-inducing habits that got weirdly popular in the 1960s, thanks to a wave of dietitians pushing scale obsession as positive reinforcement. The logic was simple, though completely flawed. Step on the scale after breakfast, lunch, and dinner to train yourself to associate eating with immediate weight changes. Supposedly, this constant tracking kept you in check and helped prevent overeating. It was framed as a modern scientific tool for self-awareness. Look at the number, feel the consequence, and stay motivated to eat less. But in reality, it left people spiraling with frustration when the numbers bounced around for reasons that had nothing to do with actual fat loss. Water weight, natural body fluctuations, even the time of day could send that number climbing, and suddenly, one innocent meal turned into a full-blown guilt trip. But that did not stop weight loss gurus from peddling it like gospel, especially to women who were told to micromanage every calorie that passed their lips. Bathroom scales became household staples, sitting in bedrooms, kitchens, even tucked beside desks for the most dedicated dieters. It was sold as empowerment, but more often than not, it just bred anxiety, unrealistic expectations, and the exhausting belief that your self-worth fluctuated with every ounce gained or lost. Friends compared numbers at coffee dates, housewives obsessed over tiny changes, and it turned eating into a mental battlefield instead of a basic necessity. Looking back, it is no wonder the diet culture of the 1960s left so many people stuck in a cycle of obsession, disappointment, and never feeling good enough. Tuna packed in water with celery sticks only was the kind of sad, flavorless lunch that made its way into glossy women's magazines, hospital diet sheets, and suburban kitchens across the 1960s. And somehow people just accepted it. You would drain the tuna, toss it onto a plate, and throw a few limp celery sticks next to it, calling it a proper meal. It was sold as a lunchtime fat zapper, a quick, low-calorie fix for anyone desperate to slim down. The tuna was always the water-packed kind because oil was considered dangerous for your waistline. And forget the mayo, those creamy, indulgent tuna salads were off-limits in the name of diet discipline. Instead, it was dry protein and crunchy celery, with no dressing, no bread, no seasoning, nothing that might make the experience remotely enjoyable. Doctors and dietitians at the time framed this as smart eating, promising it would shrink your appetite and speed up weight loss. Housewives, office workers, and students bought into it, nibbling their celery and spooning dry tuna while dreaming of real food. Some called it discipline, others called it progress. But anyone who actually lived through it probably just called it miserable. It was minimalist to the extreme, a tiny, unsatisfying plate that left you full of regret more than anything else. Still, in a decade obsessed with keeping women slim and controlled, meals like this passed for normal advice. The salt-free boiled chicken plan was one of those diet tricks that looked good in a medical pamphlet but felt downright depressing on your dinner plate. In the 1960s, this was pushed everywhere, from hospital menus to household magazines, as the gold standard for cutting calories, reducing bloating, and protecting your heart. The instructions were brutally simple. Boil your chicken breast in plain water, no salt, no butter, no seasoning, just you, your pot, and the saddest piece of poultry imaginable. Supposedly, cutting out salt meant cutting down water retention, which meant a flatter stomach, and boiled chicken was praised for being high in protein without any added fat. You were promised lean muscle, fewer cravings, and better health, all from chewing your way through plain, rubbery meat. But here is the truth nobody mentioned. It turned dinner into an exercise in joylessness. You could chew your way through an entire breast and still feel like you were punishing yourself. Some called it part of the clean eating craze. Others saw it as just another reminder that staying slim meant sacrificing everything fun. The boiled chicken plan appeared in beauty columns, heart health guides, and every so-called expert's kitchen, promising you would slim down without starving. But in reality, it left your taste buds and your spirit in the same bland, lifeless state as your dinner. It looked clean, sure, but it tasted like nothing. And the worst part? Even when you stuck to it perfectly, you would still find yourself sneaking to the pantry later, dreaming of real food, because boiled chicken never filled the hunger that came with all that discipline. Somehow, eating healthy ended up feeling a lot like punishment wrapped in medical advice. The one slice of toast breakfast was the kind of bare minimum morning meal that sounded smart on paper, but left most people running on fumes before lunch ever rolled around. In the 1960s, this was everywhere. Doctors' columns, women's magazines, and even cheerful breakfast ads that made it seem like the ultimate diet-friendly start to your day. You got one slice of plain toast, often paired with a steaming cup of black coffee, and that was considered enough to shrink your waistline, while still technically eating breakfast. No butter, no jam, sometimes not even a sprinkle of salt. Just plain, dry toast, as though chewing your way through it was an act of health and discipline all by itself. The theory was simple. Keeping breakfast light would help you stay in control, avoid cravings, and slim down faster. But in reality, it left most people cranky, hungry, and staring at the clock, counting down the minutes until lunch. Magazines framed it as a tidy compromise, fuel your day without wrecking your diet. But anyone who lived through it knows it was just another quiet way of teaching people, especially women, to embrace hunger in exchange for appearance. It sounded efficient, but it felt like deprivation disguised as wellness. And the moment you hit mid-morning exhaustion, all that discipline felt a lot more like needless suffering dressed up as health advice. The use of chewing gum to curb cravings was considered one of the easiest, safest little hacks you could rely on if you were watching your figure in the 1960s. And trust me, just about everyone was. You would pop a stick of gum after breakfast, maybe between lunch and dinner, and it was sold like some miraculous no-calorie way to stop yourself from raiding the kitchen. Magazines and diet books promised that the repetitive chewing tricked your brain into thinking you were eating something substantial, even though all you got was flavor and jaw fatigue. Brands jumped all over this, flooding the market with slim-friendly gums in mint, fruit, or those overly sweet artificial flavors that seemed like a good idea until your mouth went numb. Medical professionals, gym trainers, even social clubs backed the habit as harmless, effective, and convenient. You could do it in the office, at parties, even lounging on the couch, all while supposedly burning fat, or at least distracting yourself from hunger. But under the shiny promises and sugar-free labels was the truth. Gum never actually satisfied anyone's appetite. It just delayed the inevitable snack attack by a few hours. People would chew through entire packs in a day, jaws sore, still dreaming of a real meal. But for the calorie-counting crowd of the 1960s, this little trick was better than nothing. It was low effort, highly marketable, and perfectly aligned with the decade's obsession with staying slim at all costs. Apple cider vinegar shots before meals were one of those diet secrets that sounded cutting edge in the 1960s but were basically pulled straight from old folk remedies, only dressed up in clinical language to make them sound modern. The idea was simple. Take a shot of pungent, sour apple cider vinegar before eating, and magically your appetite would shrink, your metabolism would skyrocket, and your stubborn belly fat would melt away. Doctors, nutritionists, and diet gurus endorsed this, claiming it was rooted in ancient health wisdom and perfectly safe for those desperate to slim down. Housewives, office workers, even young women in finishing schools were encouraged to down a small glass before meals, gritting their teeth through the burn with promises of a thinner waistline. It was hailed as a metabolism booster, an appetite suppressant, even a digestive aid that made your body more efficient. But what they forgot to mention was how awful it tasted, how much it upset sensitive stomachs, and how little actual scientific proof there was to back any of it up. Still, bottles of apple cider vinegar flew off grocery store shelves, advertised in health magazines, and touted as the secret of the effortlessly slim. People suffered through the sour shot in the hopes of cutting cravings, even when it left them queasy, all because the experts of the day framed it as a small price to pay for a better body. Avoiding all orange vegetables might sound ridiculous today, but in the diet-obsessed world of the 1960s, cutting out carrots, sweet potatoes, and even pumpkin was touted as serious weight loss strategy by more than a few diet gurus. Some magazines and health pamphlets insisted that orange veggies were loaded with hidden sugars that could sabotage your efforts to slim down. Carrots, once praised for their vitamins, suddenly became the enemy of flat stomachs and trim waistlines. Sweet potatoes were branded as heavy, sugary indulgences that had no place on a proper diet plan. Even pumpkin, which barely made its way onto dinner plates outside of holiday pies, got caught in the crossfire of this food paranoia. The theory was that these veggies, with their natural sweetness, spiked blood sugar, triggered cravings, and made it harder to shed pounds. So out they went, replaced by watery greens, celery sticks, and plain iceberg lettuce that looked healthy but left you starving. It was part of a larger fear of carbohydrates and sugars, where even vegetables got demonized if they dared to taste good. Some doctors warned against them, homemakers whispered about them in weight loss groups, and suddenly orange vegetables vanished from dinner tables in homes that prided themselves on watching every calorie. Looking back, it feels absurd to fear a carrot, but for the 1960s, anything that might slow down a diet became fair game for elimination. Ice milk instead of ice cream was one of those healthier swaps that the 1960s diet culture praised endlessly, though anyone who tried it will tell you the swap left a lot to be desired. Imagine craving a rich, creamy scoop of vanilla ice cream after dinner, only to be handed a bowl of icy, watery, flavor-deprived ice milk that melted into a thin puddle before you even got to enjoy it. But back then, this was considered a genius, doctor-approved compromise for anyone watching their weight. Ice milk had fewer calories, less fat, and was marketed as the guilt-free dessert of the decade. Magazines ran ads of smiling women in perfectly pressed dresses enjoying their ice milk, looking slim, sophisticated, and totally satisfied, at least on the outside. Behind closed doors, people gritted their teeth through the watery texture, convincing themselves it tasted just like the real thing because the scale said so. It showed up at dinner parties, neighborhood barbecues, and family gatherings, always framed as the responsible, figure-friendly alternative to sinful ice cream. Some brands even added artificial sweeteners to double down on the low-calorie promise, making it even more diet-friendly and arguably even more forgettable in the flavor department. Still, for a generation terrified of gaining weight, ice milk was better than nothing, even if it never quite lived up to the real thing. Walking with ankle weights indoors was one of those quiet, sneaky little fitness trends that took hold in the 1960s, promoted as the ultimate way to burn extra calories without disrupting your daily routine. Health magazines, doctors, and fitness experts promised that strapping a few pounds around your ankles while you vacuumed, cooked, or ran errands inside the house would turn mundane chores into full-body workouts. The concept was simple. More resistance meant more calorie burn, and you would drop weight without ever having to hit the gym. Housewives embraced it as a way to multitask their way to a slimmer figure, pacing around the living room with weights strapped on, convinced that every step was melting away stubborn pounds. Fitness guides promised it was safe, effective, and invisible to guests, your secret weapon for staying trim while keeping up appearances. But ankle weights were not always as harmless as they seemed. Many people underestimated how much strain those extra pounds put on joints, ankles, and knees, leading to more than a few awkward limps at the dinner table. Still, the promise of easy, passive calorie burning was too tempting to ignore. You would see women cooking dinner with ankle weights hidden under their skirts or pacing the hallway between chores, hoping every little step brought them closer to their dream dress size. It was yet another symbol of the 1960s obsession with effortless slimness. Anything that disguised the hard work of dieting as casual daily life became an instant trend. Vitamin-fueled diet pills were the silent accomplice to many a 1960s weight loss journey. Marketed as pep pills or energy boosters, they were often prescribed by doctors with a wink and a warning. These little capsules were packed with amphetamines, and women took them gladly. 1 pill and your hunger vanished. 2 and you could clean the house twice. They made your heart race and your hands jitter, but your waistline shrank. That was the trade-off. Eaters were told it was modern medicine, science helping you stay slim. The pills were sold in cheery bottles, often paired with multivitamins to make them feel safer. But dependency was common, and withdrawal was quiet. Women did not talk about the shakes or the sudden tears. They just smiled, zipped their dresses, and took another pill. Doctors said they were safe. Advertisements said they were stylish. And whole neighborhoods of women buzzed through the day on pills that kept them moving and starving. It worked, until it didn't. In the 1960s, a bicycle was more than just a toy. It was a rite of passage. Your first real taste of freedom came with 2 wheels and a rusty chain, not a smartphone. You pedaled to the corner store, to the library, to the edge of your neighborhood and beyond. It was transportation, recreation, and cardio all wrapped in one squeaky frame. Helmets were rare, scraped knees were common, and nobody tracked distance, because you rode until the streetlights told you to stop. Every hill was a challenge, every slope a reward. There were no fancy gears, no lightweight carbon frames, just steel, sweat, and legs that got stronger every week. And the best part? No one called it exercise. It was fun, unstructured, unrestricted, full-body fun. You did not burn calories on purpose. You just did not know how to sit still. And when you did finally coast into the driveway, wind in your hair and dirt on your jeans, there was no instant dinner waiting in a box. Dinner still had to be made. And if you were lucky, maybe it was one of those rare nights for a TV dinner, with its own tiny dessert and tinfoil top. Before refrigeration, preserving meat was an art, one that involved drying, salting, and smoking. Smoked meats, particularly smoked duck breast, were a favorite among early Americans and indigenous peoples. Smoking meat over a low fire for hours or even days not only imparted a rich flavor, but also preserved it for months, making it an essential part of survival in pre-refrigeration days. The process of smoking involves both curing and drying the meat, creating a barrier to bacteria and spoilage. While today we might reach for a quick snack, early settlers smoked meats for their practical, long-term storage abilities. They didn't have refrigerators, but had a smoky solution that worked wonders. Culturally, smoked meats were as much a tradition as a necessity. Smoked duck, for example, could be eaten on its own, mixed with grains, or used in soups. The rich, savory flavor made it a favorite during celebrations and in everyday meals. It was a symbol of the resourcefulness and ingenuity of the past. From a nutritional standpoint, smoked duck breast offers protein and essential fats, ideal for sustaining energy levels. On the other hand, pemmican is a traditional food developed by indigenous peoples of North America. They were a very ideal way to preserve meat, fat, and berries all in one for long-term storage, and it's probably one of the earliest examples we have of portable food that was put in a compact form because it needed to. It was ideal for travel, trading, and quick consumption, all factors that American industries and companies would keep in mind going forward. How does all this work, though? Bison, deer, and elk are all good sources of lean meat and were herded by indigenous peoples for a long time. All the meat from these animals would be dried, either through sun-drying it or through smoking it. In place of that, rendered fat like tallow would be mixed with the powdered dried meat, and this would seal the meat, preventing any air from interacting with it and excess moisture ruining the drying process. Berries also would contain acidic compounds and antioxidants that would help kill microbe activity overall and help reduce spoilage, and the final mix of this would be molded into cakes and balls and put into compact containers. If you made pemmican properly, it could actually last all year or even more than that, and it was packed with all kinds of nutrition that were important for a nomadic lifestyle. In short, this was a wonder food, and it was built to take care of everything you would need nutritionally. Now, who can go without some canned salmon? Funny enough, it's crabs and salmon that are actually some of the most expensive seafood you can get in the modern world. Back in the time of our boomer parents, they were such common catches thanks to the ever-so-lively fishing industries that it was impossible to spend a day without smelling some salmon down the block, especially if you were living in coastal cities. Pretty much everyone in those areas relied exclusively on meats like this to get by, and they had the nicest ways of preparing them too. You'd never get a bad bloat going that would make you want to stay indoors off of steamed or grilled salmon with rice. Plus, it helped that back then, we were still very much into exploring what other people and communities were cooking. So there were all these different ways of making salmon that never crossed anyone's mind before. People were suddenly experimenting, and there was enough of the stuff to go around. You've heard of buying store-bought pies and getting up to a serious baking session. Let me introduce you to canned and frozen pies, which were savory delights that were filled with meat. Usually, you'd get more beef and chicken than you bargained for with these, but sometimes they'd come in fruity flavors too because towards the end of the boomer generation, plant-based and vegan eating was starting to pop off. It was really a wonderful time when this first dropped, though. People were suddenly starting to have their most favorite comfort food available to them in the most convenient ways. Going to the store to pick up a pie was a treat, in more ways than one. It was nice to have something so familiar on hand like that. Salad without dressing was not a trend, it was a commandment. If you wanted to lose weight, the rule was simple: skip the dressing and chew slowly. That was it. Lettuce, tomato, cucumber, raw and plain. No oil, no vinegar. Certainly no creamy French or ranch. The idea was that chewing more and seasoning less would help you feel full with fewer calories. Women would pack tiny salads into plastic containers and bring them to work or eat them while watching their favorite daytime soaps. The crunch was part of the experience. It made the whole meal feel like it was taking up space. But that was the trick: volume without substance. You could eat an entire plate of greens and still feel empty. And that was considered success. The ritual of eating salad without dressing was about proving something to yourself, to your mirror, to the other women at the table. "I can eat like this," it said. "I have control." It was not about flavor. It was about discipline. And a dry fork full of iceberg lettuce was proof. Television dinners in the 1960s were not everyday fare. They were events. That foil-wrapped tray pulled from the oven after what felt like hours was a small luxury. Salisbury steak, mashed potatoes, a spoonful of peas, and maybe a brownie in the corner. It was not convenience. It was novelty. Something you might get if mom was sick, or dad was working late, or you were being treated to a night in front of the television. These frozen meals had no illusions about nutrition. They were a break from the norm, not the new normal. Most nights, food was cooked from scratch. These dinners were backup plans, not blueprints. They felt modern, space age even, but no one mistook them for real food. They were too small, too salty, too stiff. They were a glimpse of the future, but nobody wanted to live in them. And when it came time to celebrate, no one turned to the freezer. They got in the car and went somewhere special. Because eating out, that was something you dressed up for. When survival depended on what you could carry, one food stood out as the ultimate road snack: dried meat. Indigenous peoples of North America perfected the art of making jerky long before it became a gas station staple. Using techniques that were as practical as they were ingenious, they ensured meat could last for weeks or even months without spoiling. The preservation method was simple but effective. Thin strips of meat, often bison, deer, or elk, were cut and dried in the sun or smoked over a fire. The low moisture and high protein content made it lightweight, portable, and perfect for long journeys. Early settlers and traders quickly adopted the practice, turning jerky into a frontier favorite. Jerky's cultural roots run deep, especially among Native American communities, where it was a way to maximize resources. Every part of the animal was used, embodying a respect for nature that modern sustainability movements could learn from. With its dense nutrition and near indestructibility, jerky became a food that could outlast even the toughest trails. It wasn't gourmet, but when you're miles from civilization, chewy beats hungry every time. We're going to end the list on an age-old trick, and I'm sure some of you can already guess. You pickle in vinegar, and yes, the cartoons, the movies, and your grandparents were all right. It really does work. A lot better than we'd like to think, really. You can soak just about any kind of food in this too. You can even throw in eggs and meat, not just vegetables and different kinds of fruits. This solution of vinegar, salt, and water, as well as sugar and spices, results in this really tangy and sour flavor, which for some is an acquired taste, but it extends the shelf life of whatever you're cooking with by miles. So the pickling solution involves white vinegar with water and salt. Some people throw in garlic, dill, and coriander or peppercorns in there. The vinegar and water mix can either be heated or just poured cold, but the important part, and really the one where all the magic happens, is when you submerge it. The acidity of the vinegar helps to preserve the food a lot, while the sealing ensures that it stays fresh. Depending on the spices you throw in, your fruit or meat can get a lot more flavorful too. In the South of America, loads of people would pickle okra or cucumbers or even beets, especially during the Depression. They made such good appetizers, they were convenient to carry, and they helped things last longer. Honestly, it's just a win-win-win-win all around, and what else can you ask for in life? As far as your dairy needs go, condensed canned milk was right up there with regular old chocolate milk. People would grab a bottle or can on their way to work for a quick drink to freshen up their mood, and it would work every time. Lots of happier dentists in that era, too. Typically, you got these in 14-ounce cans, but the best part was that it didn't really require refrigeration, which wasn't exactly too common during the time of boomers. Some of the best brands to buy from were Borden's or Elsie the Cow. Actually, they were pretty much the only brands to buy from. Any store would have Borden's face front and other brands stacked in the back, which is ever so subtle, but the message was loud and clear. So, it looks good, it costs nothing, and it tastes awesome, but what's it actually made out of? Well, this milk was made by taking out a bit more than half of the water from the whole milk and then adding sugar to preserve it. You got some pretty rich milk that way, but no one was really buying this just to drink raw milk, even if that was part of it. The thing is, this made baking so much easier since you had good fresh milk closer to you than ever before. You no longer needed to buy whole milk from one shop. Everyone could just go to whatever store was nearest for them and get to make whatever they wanted. Lemon meringue pies or cookies, whatever you'd need was suddenly so much easier. It goes a long way towards awakening people to their inner chef when you give them almost MasterChef levels of access to good ingredients. Canned Tab Cola and cigarettes were, for many women in the 1960s, a lunch plan. Tab was Coca-Cola's answer to diet culture. No sugar, all fizz, and just enough aftertaste to remind you it was working. One can had fewer than 5 calories, and that was considered a win. It came in a slim pink can and promised to help you stay in shape. Pair it with a cigarette, and you had a full afternoon of appetite suppression. No cooking, no chewing, just bubbles and smoke. Women drank Tab while flipping through catalogs, folding laundry, or sitting on patios with sunglasses and tight belts. It was not about health. It was about getting through the day without caving. Cigarettes dulled the hunger. Tab replaced the snack. And both together became a socially acceptable way to skip meals. People talked about self-control like it was a badge of honor. But behind the glamour was a simple truth. Staying skinny often meant staying hungry. In the 1960s, you got where you needed to go with your own two legs. No one was chauffeuring kids across town for fun. You walked to school, to the corner store, to your best friend's house. Sidewalks were used and front porches were where parents kept a quiet eye. There were bikes, yes, but mostly there were feet. Movement was built into the fabric of life. You did not think of it as exercise. You just moved. If it rained, you wore boots. If it snowed, you trudged through it. This kind of daily, low-grade motion did more than just burn calories. It grounded people in their communities, their neighborhoods, their routines. No one tracked their steps. No one needed to, because standing still was rare and sitting was brief. And when the school bell rang or the groceries were brought home, the day still had light in it. And that meant it was time to go outside, not to a screen or a sofa, but to the yard, the field, or the curb where the real stories lived. Centuries before the invention of tortillas, tamales, or even nachos, Native American cultures were already perfecting the art of using corn in ways that made it both more digestible and more durable. The technique used was nixtamalization. By soaking and cooking corn kernels in an alkaline solution, usually lime water, the process released essential nutrients and made corn easier to grind into masa, the base for many beloved dishes. Masa isn't just any dough. It's corn transformed through fermentation, a key to both its preservation and nutritional benefits. Once treated, it could be stored for several days or dried for longer preservation, ensuring a steady food source during the harvest season. This made it the ultimate survival food long before commercial kitchens got their hands on it. Masa represented more than sustenance. It was a symbol of resourcefulness and the deep relationship between people and the land. It was the foundation of countless recipes across North and South America, linking indigenous communities across vast regions. Now, the next thing we have is packing your meat in saltwater brine. The reason this works is because saltwater brine is a method of preserving food by submerging it in a mix of salt, water, and ingredients like herbs and spices for aromatics. Salt pretty much gets rid of any kind of moisture that you don't need and makes an environment that promotes longevity in your protein by getting rid of any bacteria that would cause spoilage. The concentration of salt is around 10%, and when dissolved in water, you basically get a bath with some really nice preserving effects. Curing ingredients, like the ones used in cold smoking meats, are often things like sugar, nitrates, or spices that people would add to the brine. This would help add flavor and make sure the meat keeps its color, just like how we discussed before when nitrates came up. Brining would typically take a while, but that would depend on the kind of meat you were using and its size. It wasn't really just people who were living centuries ago that did this. Lots of indigenous communities, nomadic people, and even upscale restaurants still use brining as a technique to either preserve meat or to increase its lifespan. Brining helps to bring flavors out because the meat stays submerged for so long, the flavors get infused. The next time you want to figure out how to take your meat up a notch, maybe try a saltwater brine. Next, we're going to look at a classic for coastal cities, which is some old-fashioned canned sardines. Usually, the cans would be filled with oil, water, sauces, mustard, or tomatoes, and they had a lot of flavor and health benefits. You could get some really vivid and salty fish that also happened to be full of omega-3, making your lank account only slightly lighter and your body 10 times fresher. Plus, the best part about fish like this was just how easy it was to make it and all the things you could do with it. You could steam the fish, boil it, or even grill it and fry it. If that wasn't up your alley, then you could just eat it with crackers, make a sardine sandwich, or even dice it up and use it as a pizza topping or in a salad. People even used sardines in pasta, and I don't know about you, but I think that covers most of what we eat in our daily lives. All that for just 10 cents? Sign me up. Plus, sardines were arguably the most common catch of the day. That explains why they're so cheap. But it also meant that this was a taste pretty much everyone had acquired over years and years of eating them. So not only was it cheap and good, it was familiar and nostalgic. Real comfort food vibes, you know? Skipping dinner after a heavy lunch was one of the oldest tricks in the diet book, and it stuck around because it was easy to disguise. Eat big at noon, pick at a salad by 6, or better yet, nothing. The phrase, "eat like a king at breakfast, a prince at lunch, and a pauper at dinner," was passed around like gospel. Housewives followed it religiously, packing lunchboxes with real food while saving nothing for themselves later. Some would claim they weren't hungry. Others blamed the heat. But more often than not, dinner was skipped on purpose. It was not starvation. It was strategy. By eating early and stopping completely, you bought a sense of control. And when the stomach growled at bedtime, that just meant the diet was working. It became a quiet habit. You fed everyone else. You cleaned the plates. And then you poured a glass of water, sat down, and told yourself that full bellies did not belong to you. Not tonight. In a 1960s kitchen, you could hear the rhythm of real food being made. A pot clattered on the stove. Something sizzled in a pan. The oven ticked softly as it preheated. There was no microwave hum, no frozen dinners spinning on a plastic tray. Meals took time, sometimes hours. And that time meant movement. Stirring, lifting, chopping, baking. Parents did not just burn calories eating, they burned them making dinner. Even heating up leftovers meant a skillet, not a button. There was an awareness of food, a presence that modern life has blurred. You did not grab something, you prepared it. Every meal was a small ritual of care and effort. And the work was not just about taste, it was part of staying lean. The process itself kept you moving. And when dinner was finally done, the table was set. The family sat down, and you ate like you meant it. But before dinner, there was one sound every kid waited for. The squeak of tires, the slap of pedals, the call of the open street. Because nothing felt freer or fitter than flying down a hill on your bicycle. When early settlers in America wanted to fill their bellies with something hearty and long-lasting, they turned to hominy grits. The process to make them, known as nixtamalization, involved soaking corn in an alkaline solution, usually made from lye or lime, to remove the hulls. This method not only made the corn easier to grind, but also increased its nutritional value by releasing niacin, which was essential for avoiding diseases like pellagra. Hominy grits were a staple in many American households, especially in the South. Their cultural significance can't be overstated. Grits were more than just food. They were comfort, tradition, and a social experience. Whether served with butter, cheese, or gravy, grits were versatile, with the power to turn a simple meal into something memorable. Preserving grits was straightforward. Once ground into a fine meal, they could be stored for months, making them an ideal food for times when fresh produce wasn't available. This made grits a go-to option in the days before refrigeration, especially during long winters or in remote areas. In addition to being easy to store, grits were a rich source of carbohydrates and fiber, providing lasting energy without requiring complicated preparation. So, cold smoking your meat is a tried and tested method of making sure your meat lasts the long haul, no matter how rough it might get. These are techniques that have been proven to work by several cultures around the world throughout history, so you can definitely trust in their authenticity. What really is cold smoking, though? Basically, it involves exposing your meat to smoke that's from a temperature around 68 to 86 Fahrenheit, and that's a lot lower than the smoke that usually comes from warm fires. Cold smoking can't cook the meat, but what it does do is give the meat a pretty nice flavor and dry it out. We've already gone over why drying your meat out is such a good idea. But cold smoking was done via smoking chambers that were specifically built for this purpose. It was honestly a wonderful way of adding an incredible amount of flavor to your food. And thanks to coupling it with things like curing your meats with additional salts and drying them out, You get to have long-lasting, good-tasting meat for the majority of your next few months. Golden syrup is this really thick sugar syrup that is pretty accurately named because, wow, this thing has a vibrantly strong amber hue. That kind of fits the taste of the syrup too. When I see amber-colored things, especially sweet ones, my mind goes straight to caramel. Does that happen for you too? We'd both be right though, since the syrup was caramel-flavored. It also had a sweetener that really sealed the whole deal together, wrapped in a neat little bow. You could use this for so many things, like making your porridge a bit more lively with this, adding it to desserts for some extra oomph, or using it as a drizzle over buttermilk pancakes. The possibilities covered breakfast, lunch, and dinner, so you can see why every boomer's home had this in their pantry. A lot of easy and no-fuss baking recipes like flapjacks and tarts were pretty much reliant on this syrup, and for good reason too. This thing really tasted amazing. Weighing yourself daily was not about health, it was about ritual. The bathroom scale became a quiet confessional, tucked beside the tub or hidden under the sink. Every morning before breakfast, women would step on with one breath held and eyes closed, waiting to see if the needle rewarded or punished them. It was not just about the number, it was about mood. A single pound up could ruin a whole day. A pound down meant permission to smile. Scales were marketed like beauty tools, pink, sleek, often advertised next to lipstick or soap. The message was clear. The scale was your mirror. It told the truth. Some women even kept journals just for weight entries, marking little arrows beside each one. Down meant good, up meant guilt. And staying the same? That meant you were still in control. There was no applause, no celebration, just a number, every morning, and the quiet hope that it would be smaller than the day before. The backyard garden was not just a hobby in the 1960s. It was a strategy. Rows of tomatoes, carrots, beans, and squash filled raised beds or long-tilled strips of soil. You grew what you could, canned what you had to, and traded with neighbors when your zucchinis got out of hand. Children learned how to weed and water before they could spell vegetable. Victory gardens from the war had planted a deeper cultural seed. Food could come from your own hands. A salad did not start in a bag. It started with dirt under your fingernails. Fresh produce was not wrapped in plastic or stamped with barcodes. It came in baskets, buckets, or brown paper sacks. And even if you only had room for a few herbs on the windowsill, it still mattered. Gardens were not just about nutrition. They were about self-reliance. And that pride, that satisfaction of eating what you grew, made it easier to say no to processed junk. Instead of neon-colored sports drinks and vitamin water, most kids drank the same thing every day. Milk, plain and cold, straight from the fridge. If you think acorns are just for squirrels, think again. For indigenous peoples across North America, acorns were a dietary cornerstone, transformed into a versatile ingredient, acorn flour. But before they could be eaten, these little nuts needed some serious prep work. Acorns are packed with tannins, bitter compounds that can upset your stomach. To make them edible, they were shelled, ground into a coarse meal, and repeatedly soaked in water to leach out the tannins. Once dried, the resulting flour could be stored for months, sometimes even years, if kept cool and dry. It was the ultimate long-lasting pantry item. Nutritionally, acorn flour was a powerhouse. Rich in carbohydrates and fats, it provided slow-burning energy, perfect for people with physically demanding lifestyles. It could be made into porridge, bread, or even dumplings, offering a hearty meal that didn't rely on fragile crops like wheat. Culturally, acorns held deep significance. Oak trees were considered gifts of the land, and acorn processing was often a communal activity. Some indigenous groups even used specific tools, like rock mortars carved into bedrock to grind the nuts. Certain oak species produced sweeter acorns, making them more prized. Imagine being the lucky one with the dessert oak in your backyard. Mixed vegetables were pretty much what they sound like. You had the usual gang of peas, green beans, corn, carrots, corn, some celery, and corn again. Did I emphasize that they really liked their corn? I hope I did. Anyway, for just about 15 cents, all the nutrition in the world was at your fingertips, and it was a massively good way to plan your meals and save money at the same time. You could use this as a standby meal, put it in a pot pie, use it for casseroles and side dishes, or whatever else. Stir-fry them and serve it up with rice or eat it with some chili. The world is your oyster. Or your carrot? Anyway, you could do a lot here. Also, it was a really convenient way for grandmas and home chefs to sneak in some greens in their kids' foods without them realizing it. Can't walk up into the kitchen and say, "Mom, no carrots," if she pulls a fast one on you and sneaks ready-made vegetables from a can, huh? Drop your wildest 1960s diet story in the comments, and do not forget to like and subscribe for more forgotten health fads.